The stagecoach lurched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered like gold in the late afternoon sun. Clara Everett stepped down her boots, sinking into the soft earth of Willow Creek, a speck of a town nestled in the rolling hills of a fictional corner of 19th century Montana. Her heart thudded not from the journey's jostling, but from the weight of hope and fear clutched tight in her chest. She was 28 with calloused hands and a face plain by society's standards, her brown hair pinned messily beneath a faded bonnet. In her pocket, a crumpled letter promised a new life, a husband named Samuel Hart, who had written of companionship and a shared future. But as she scanned the sparse crowd, her stomach twisted. No one stepped forward to claim her. The townsfolk milled about their whispers, sharp as thorns. A man in a tailored coat, his mustache curled with self-importance, approached her. This was Amos Reed, the merchant who'd arranged her passage as Samuel's intended. His eyes raked over her, lingering on her worn dress and unremarkable features. "Miss Everett, I presume." His tone was cold like a winter stream. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Samuel expected someone else, someone more suited. The words landed like a slap, each syllable a reminder of every rejection she'd faced back in Boston. Too plain, too stubborn, too poor. Clara's jaw tightened, but she held his gaze. "I came for a promise, Mr. Reed. Where is Mr. Hart?" Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Amos smirked, gesturing vaguely toward the hills. "He's out there tending his land, but he's made his choice clear. You're welcome to stay, but don't expect a warm welcome." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their eyes dissecting her like vultures. Among them, a young woman with kind eyes and a flour-dusted apron, Lydia, the baker's daughter, offered a small, pitying smile. Clara clung to it like a lifeline. She squared her shoulders, gripping her satchel. She hadn't crossed half a continent to crumble now. The air smelled of pine and fresh-turned earth, and the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, urging her to stand tall. She'd find Samuel Hart herself, demand answers, and carve out a place in this unforgiving land. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber, and Rose, Clara took her first step toward the hills, her heart a mix of defiance and dread. Would Samuel be as cruel as Amos? Or was there a chance, however slim, for something real? The wind carried the sharp tang of cedar as Clara trudged along the dirt path winding into the hills. Her boots crunched against gravel each step, a quiet rebellion against Amos Reed's stinging dismissal. The sky bled crimson now, the sun sinking behind jagged peaks, and Willow Creek's whispers faded into the hum of crickets. Clara's satchel weighed heavy on her shoulder, but heavier still was the question gnawing at her. What kind of man breaks a promise without so much as a glance? She'd left Boston to escape judgment, to build a life with someone who'd see her for more than her plain face or threadbare past. Now doubt crept in like frost. The path climbed steeper, flanked by towering pines and wildflowers that glowed faintly in the twilight. Clara's breath hitched as she caught sight of a cabin nestled in a clearing, its chimney puffing lazy curls of smoke. This had to be Samuel Hart's place. Her pulse quickened, not with romance but with the need for answers. She smoothed her dress, squared her shoulders, and knocked on the weathered door. No response. She knocked again, harder, the sound echoing like a challenge. The door creaked open, revealing a man who could only be Samuel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair mussed from work, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His flannel shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms scarred from labor. He looked at her, not with disdain, but with confusion, as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to solve. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was low, steady, like the rumble of a distant river. "I'm Clara Everett," she said, her chin lifting. "The woman you sent for. The woman you apparently don't want." Her words were sharp, but her throat tightened with the fear that he'd turn her away too. Samuel's brow furrowed, and he stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Miss Everett, Amos said you'd arrived, but I didn't know you'd come all this way tonight." His gaze flickered over her, not judging but searching, as if trying to reconcile her with the idea of a bride. "Then why reject me?" She pressed, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "You wrote to me for months. Was it all a lie?" Samuel's expression softened, and he gestured to a bench by the porch. "Sit, please. It's not what you think." Reluctantly, she sat, the wood cool against her hands. He explained Amos had pressured him to marry a wealthier woman, a widow named Eleanor Price, who'd arrived in town a month ago with money and charm. Samuel had refused, but Amos had taken it upon himself to dismiss Clara, claiming it was Samuel's will. "I never said I didn't want you." Samuel finished, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that made her chest ache. "But I won't force you to stay, not after this." Clara studied him, the lines of his face etched with a quiet pain. She recognized someone who'd been hurt before, just like her. The night air wrapped around them heavy with the scent of damp earth and possibility. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to try again? The stars blinked awake above Samuel's cabin, their light faint against the inky sky, as if hesitating to witness Clara's decision. She sat on the bench, her fingers tracing the rough grain of the wood, the cool night air sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke. Samuel stood a respectful distance away, his silhouette framed by the warm glow spilling from the cabin's window. His words, "I never said I didn't want you," echoed in her mind, stirring a flicker of hope she wasn't ready to trust. Too many times hope had led her to heartbreak, to voices that mocked her plainness or her stubborn will. Yet something in Samuel's steady gaze and the quiet weight of his apology made her want to believe him. "I'll stay," Clara said at last, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her chest. "But not as your bride, not yet. I need to know you're a man of your word." Samuel nodded, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "Fair enough, Miss Everett. There's a spare room in the cabin. You're welcome to it until you decide what's next." His offer was practical, not romantic, but it carried a respect she hadn't expected. She followed him inside the warmth of the fire, chasing away the chill of the evening. The cabin was simple wooden floors, a sturdy table, a shelf of worn books, but it felt like a home lived in and honest. As Samuel showed her to a small room with a cot and a quilt, Clara caught sight of a faded daguerreotype on the mantel. A woman with soft eyes, her smile tinged with sorrow. "Who's that?" she asked, curiosity overriding caution. Samuel's face tightened, a shadow passing over it. "My sister Mary. She passed 2 years ago. Fever took her." His voice was low, raw, and Clara felt a pang of guilt for prying. "I'm sorry," she said softly, but he only nodded and turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire. The next morning, Clara woke to the scent of coffee and the distant lowing of cattle. She stepped outside the dawn, painting the hills in shades of gold and lavender. Samuel was already at work, splitting wood with steady practice swings. She watched him for a moment, noting the strength in his movements, the way he paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He wasn't like the men in Boston, all polish and promises. There was an earthiness to him, a quiet dignity that made her want to know more. But trouble wasn't far off. As Clara walked into Willow Creek to buy supplies, she overheard whispers at the general store. "She's the one Samuel sent for, poor thing. No match for Eleanor Price," a woman sneered, her voice dripping with pity. Eleanor, Clara learned, was the widow Amos championed, a beauty with raven hair and a fortune determined to win Samuel's land and heart. Clara's cheeks burned, but she held her head high, buying flour and thread with coins she'd scraped together. Lydia, the baker's daughter, slipped her an extra loaf of bread with a wink. "Don't mind the gossips, Clara. You've got more grit than all of them." Back at the cabin, Clara resolved to prove them wrong, not just to the town but to herself. She'd helped Samuel with his land show. She was more than a rejected bride. As she approached him, hoe in hand, ready to work the fields, she wondered, could she build a life here with him, despite the doubts and the looming shadow of Eleanor? The sun hung high over Willow Creek, its heat pressing against Clara's skin as she drove the hoe into the stubborn earth. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and the scent of damp soil and crushed grass filled her lungs. She'd insisted on helping Samuel in the fields, determined to prove she was no fragile city girl, no matter what the townsfolk whispered. Each swing of the hoe was a defiance of their pity, of Amos's sneer, of the memory of her father's voice back in Boston. "No man will want a woman who works like a mule," Clara gritted her teeth. She'd make her own way, with or without their approval. Samuel worked nearby, guiding a plow behind a pair of oxen, his movements steady and sure. He hadn't protested when she'd offered to help, only handed her the hoe with a nod that felt like trust. Now, as he paused to drink from a canteen, he watched her with a quiet intensity. "You're stronger than you look, Miss Everett," he called, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Clara's cheeks warmed, not from the sun. "Call me Clara," she said, wiping dirt from her hands. And I've had years of practice proving folks wrong. Their work stretched into the afternoon, the rhythm of labor easing the tension between them. Samuel shared stories of the land, how he'd built the cabin after his sister's death, how the river nearby sang with trout in the spring. Clara listened, her guard softening as she glimpsed the man behind the calluses. He spoke of the town's struggles, how Amos's greed for land and power stifled the smaller farmers. "He wants my acres for Eleanor's dowry," Samuel admitted, his voice low. "Thinks he can bully me into it." Clara's stomach nodded. Eleanor again, a shadow cast over her fragile hope. As dust settled, painting the hills in hues of violet and gold, they sat on the porch sharing a simple meal of bread and stew. The air was thick with the hum of cicadas and the distant rush of the river. Clara stole glances at Samuel, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his hands moved with care as he sliced bread. But her thoughts were interrupted by hoofbeats. A woman rode up, her silk dress gleaming even in the fading light. Eleanor Price. She dismounted with grace, her dark hair cascading like a waterfall. "Samuel," she purred, ignoring Clara. "I brought you some of my cook's preserves. A man like you deserves better than this." Her gaze flicked to Clara, sharp and dismissive. Clara's spine stiffened, but Samuel's voice cut through the tension. "Thank you, Eleanor, but Clara and I are managing fine." His tone was polite but firm, and Clara's heart gave a small, unexpected leap. Eleanor's smile tightened, and she left with a curt nod, her horse kicking up dust as she rode away. Clara stared after her, the sting of rejection mingling with a new resolve. She'd work harder not just for Samuel, but for herself, to show Willow Creek she belonged. As the stars emerged, Samuel turned to her. "You don't have to prove anything to her, Clara. Or to me." His words were soft, but they carried a weight that made her breath catch. Could she believe him? Could she let herself hope for more than a place to belong, for a man who saw her as she was? The morning air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of dew-kissed clover as Clara stepped into Willow Creek's bustling square. The market hummed with life vendors hawking apples, children darting through the crowd, and the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Clara clutched a basket of vegetables from Samuel's garden, her mission clear: sell their surplus and claim her place in this town. Her dress was patched but clean, her hair neatly braided, and her chin high despite the memory of Eleanor's dismissive glance. "They'll see me," she thought, not as a rejected bride, but as someone who belongs. She set up near Lydia's bakery stall, where the warm aroma of fresh bread offered a small comfort. Lydia greeted her with a grin, brushing flour from her apron. "You're brave, Clara, coming here after all the gossip." Clara forced a smile, arranging carrots and potatoes with care. "I've faced worse than whispers," she said, though her stomach churned as townsfolk passed, their eyes lingering with curiosity or pity. Some bought her vegetables, their coins a quiet victory, but others muttered about Samuel's charity case, their words sharp as nettles. Midday brought a new challenge. Amos Reed strode through the market, his tailored coat a stark contrast to the townsfolk's simple attire. With him was Eleanor, her smile as polished as her silk gloves. "Miss Everett Amos," said his voice loud enough to draw eyes still playing farmer's wife, "Samuel deserves better than a charity project." Clara's hands tightened on her basket, but before she could retort, Lydia stepped forward. "She's earning her keep, Amos, which is more than some can say." The crowd murmured, and Clara felt a surge of gratitude for her friend's courage. The confrontation was cut short by a commotion near the square's edge. A farmer's cart had overturned, spilling grain across the road. Without thinking, Clara rushed to help, her strong arms lifting sacks alongside the men. Samuel appeared, having come to town for supplies, and joined her, their hands brushing as they worked side by side. His presence steadied her like an anchor in a storm. When the cart was righted, the farmer, a grizzled man named Tom, clapped Clara on the shoulder. "You're a good one, miss," he said, loud enough for others to hear. A few townsfolk nodded, their skepticism softening. As the market wound down, Samuel walked Clara back to the cabin, the setting sun casting long shadows across the hills. The air smelled of hay and distant rain, and their silence was comfortable, woven with the day's shared labor. "You didn't have to help Tom," Samuel said, his voice warm, "but I'm glad you did. Folks noticed." Clara's chest swelled, not just from his words, but from the feeling of mattering, of being seen. Yet doubt lingered. Could she truly belong here, with Eleanor's shadow looming and Amos's influence poisoning the town? At the cabin, Samuel paused, his gray eyes catching the last light. "You're changing things, Clara. Not just for you, but for all of us." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to name. Her heart raced, torn between fear of another rejection and the pull of something deeper, a connection rooted not in promises, but in shared strength. As the crickets began their nightly chorus, she wondered, could she let herself want more than acceptance? Could she want him? The river sang softly, its waters glinting like molten silver under the midday sun, as Clara knelt at its edge, scrubbing laundry against a smooth stone. The rhythmic slap of fabric against rock steadied her thoughts, but her heart was restless. A week had passed since the market, and Willow Creek's whispers had softened. Some now greeted her with nods, even smiles. Yet the weight of Eleanor's presence and Amos's disdain lingered like a storm cloud. Clara wrung out a shirt, her hands raw, and glanced toward the hills where Samuel was mending fences. His quiet strength drew her, but so did her fear of trusting too much, of being cast aside again. As she worked, Lydia appeared, her apron dusted with sugar from the bakery. "Thought you might want company," she said, settling on the bank with a basket of apples. Clara smiled, grateful for the friendship that had become her anchor. They talked of small things, the harvest festival, the new preacher, but Lydia's voice grew serious. "Eleanor's been asking about you, Clara. She's not happy. Samuel's keeping you here." Clara's stomach twisted. "She thinks I'm stealing her prize," she said, her tone dry but her chest tight. Lydia snorted. "She wants his land, not his heart. You're different. He sees you." Clara's hand stilled the water cold against her fingers. Did he Samuel's kindness? His respect felt like a gift she wasn't sure she deserved. Before she could respond, hoofbeats echoed, and Eleanor herself rode up, her horse's coat gleaming. She dismounted, her emerald dress a stark contrast to the river's earthy tones. "Miss Everett," she said, her voice honeyed but sharp. "You're quite the talk of the town. A pity, it's all pity." Clara stood, wiping her hands, her pulse quickening. "I don't need pity, Mrs. Price. I need a place to stand." Eleanor's smile was a blade. "And you think that's with Samuel? He's bound to me by more than you know." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. "He loved me once before I married my late husband. He'll choose me again." The words struck Clara like a whip, stirring memories of her own rejections, men who'd called her plain, unworthy. But she held Eleanor's gaze. "If he chooses you, it'll be his decision, not yours." Eleanor left with a huff, but her words burrowed deep. That evening, as Clara and Samuel shared supper by the fire, the crackle of logs couldn't drown out her doubts. She watched him, his face softened by the glow, and finally asked Samuel, "Was there ever something between you and Eleanor?" He froze his spoon halfway to his mouth, then set it down. Years ago, he admitted, his voice low. "Before she married for money. She broke my trust, Clara. That's not something I give lightly." His eyes met hers, steady and unguarded, and her heart ached with the truth in them. The firelight danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to hold their past, his loss, her rejections. "I don't trust easily either," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel leaned closer, his hand brushing hers, a touch so brief, yet electric. "Then maybe we learn together," he said. The air between them thickened, alive with possibility, but also with risk. Could she let go of her fears? Could they build something real despite Eleanor's shadow and the town's watchful eyes? The Harvest Festival bloomed in Willow Creek like a wildflower after rain, filling the town square with the glow of lanterns and the scent of roasted corn and apple cider. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart a drumbeat of nerves and excitement. Her dress, a simple blue cotton she'd mended herself, felt out of place among the swirling skirts and polished boots. But she'd come to dance, to laugh, to prove she was part of this town. Samuel stood beside her, his flannel shirt clean and his hair tamed, his presence a quiet shield against the curious glances. "What are we to each other?" Clara wondered, her fingers brushing the calluses on her palms. The square thrummed with fiddles and laughter, children weaving through the crowd with sticky faces. Clara had helped Lydia bake pies for the festival, their shared hours in the bakery, forging a bond as warm as the ovens. Now Lydia waved her over, pressing a cup of cider into her hands. "You look like you belong here," Lydia said, her eyes twinkling. Clara smiled, but the warmth faded as she caught sight of Eleanor across the square, her crimson dress drawing every eye. She was laughing with Amos, her hand resting lightly on his arm, but her gaze locked on Samuel. The music shifted and couples flooded the dance floor, their boots stomping in rhythm. Samuel turned to Clara, his gray eyes catching the lantern light. "Care to dance?" he asked, his voice soft but sure. Her breath caught. She hadn't danced since she was a girl, mocked for her clumsy steps. But she nodded, letting him lead her to the center. His hand was warm, steady, guiding her through the steps with a patience that made her heart ache. For a moment, the world was just them, the music, and the brush of their hands. But the moment shattered. Eleanor glided over, her smile sharp as a blade. "Samuel, surely you'll save a dance for an old friend?" she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Clara stiffened, but Samuel's grip on her hand tightened. "I'm dancing with Clara," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but she turned away, her laughter brittle as she rejoined Amos. The crowd whispered and Clara felt their stares like pinpricks, but Samuel's steady presence grounded her. "Don't let her get to you," he murmured, spinning her gently. "You're here. That's what matters." As the dance ended, a shout broke the revelry. A barn at the edge of town was ablaze, flames licking the night sky. The crowd surged toward the fire, and Clara ran with Samuel, her heart pounding. They joined the bucket brigade, passing water from the river to douse the flames. Clara worked tirelessly, her arms burning, her face streaked with soot. When the fire was finally out, the townsfolk cheered, and Tom, the farmer she'd helped before, clapped her on the back. "You're one of us, Clara," he said, his voice rough with gratitude. Exhausted, Clara and Samuel sat on a hay bale, the air heavy with smoke and the fading warmth of cider. His shoulder brushed hers, and she felt a spark, a promise of something more. "You were fearless tonight," he said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. Her chest tightened with a mix of fear and longing. Could she trust this feeling, this man, this town, or would Eleanor's schemes and Amos's power tear it all away? The dawn broke over Willow Creek with a hush, the sky streaked with pink and gold, the air sharp with the scent of charred wood from the previous night's fire. Clara stood outside Samuel's cabin, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of coffee, its bitter warmth grounding her against the churn of her thoughts. The harvest festival had shifted something. Her place in the town felt sure, but her heart was tangled. Samuel's steady hand during the dance, his quiet defense against Eleanor, had stirred a longing she hadn't dared name. Yet Eleanor's words, "He loved me once," clung to her like damp earth, heavy with doubt. Samuel emerged from the barn, his shirt dusted with hay, his face etched with the weariness of a man carrying more than the morning's chores. "You're up early," he said, his voice warm but guarded. Clara nodded, her fingers tightening on the mug. Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about. She hesitated, then plunged forward. "Samuel, I need to know what's between you and Eleanor now. She says you're still hers." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze, needing the truth more than comfort. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, and sat on the porch steps beside her. The air was cool, laced with the scent of pine and distant smoke. "Eleanor and I were young," he said, his eyes fixed on the hills. "I thought I loved her, but she chose a richer man, left me without a word. When she came back a widow, she thought she could pick up where we left off. But I'm not that man anymore, Clara." His gaze met hers, raw and steady. "I want someone who stays, someone who fights for what matters." Her heart thudded, caught between hope and fear. Before she could respond, hoofbeats interrupted, and Amos Reed wrote up his face, a mask of calculated charm. "Morning, Hart," he called, ignoring Clara. "I've got an offer. Sell me your land, and I'll make sure Eleanor's wealth keeps this town thriving. You don't need the burden." Samuel's jaw tightened. "My land's not for sale, Amos. You know that." Amos's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Think on it. You and your guest might find life harder if you don't." Clara's blood boiled, but she stayed silent, her mind racing. Amos's threat wasn't just about land. It was about power, about keeping her and Samuel in their place. As Amos rode off, Lydia arrived, her face flushed from running. "Clara, the town's talking," she said, breathless. "They're saying you and Samuel saved the barn last night. People are starting to see you differently." She paused, her eyes softening. "But Eleanor's spreading rumors, saying you're after Samuel's land, not his heart." The accusation stung, but Clara straightened, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let Eleanor's lies or Amos's threats define her. That afternoon, she joined Samuel in repairing the town's schoolhouse damaged in the fire. They worked side by side, hammering nails and hauling beams, their shared effort a quiet defiance. The townsfolk noticed Tom tipped his hat, and others offered small nods of respect. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber, Samuel brushed sawdust from his hands and looked at her. "You're making a difference, Clara. More than you know." His words warmed her, but doubt lingered. Could she trust this growing bond, or would Amos and Eleanor tear it apart? As the evening breeze carried the scent of cedar, Clara felt a spark of courage she'd fight for her place, and maybe for Samuel too. The wind howled through Willow Creek, rattling the shutters of Samuel's cabin and carrying the sharp scent of an approaching storm. Clara stood at the window, watching dark clouds gather over the mountains, their weight mirroring the tension coiling in her chest. Days had passed since Amos's threat, and the town buzzed with a restless energy. Clara had poured herself into helping rebuild the schoolhouse, her hands blistered from hauling lumber, her heart buoyed by the townsfolk's growing respect. But Eleanor's rumors clung like damp leaves, and Amos's shadow loomed larger, threatening the fragile life she was building. That morning, Clara found Samuel in the barn, his face drawn as he repaired a broken harness. The air smelled of leather and hay, and the distant rumble of thunder underscored her unease. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Samuel set the harness down, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Amos is pushing harder," he admitted. "He's got the bank on his side, threatening to call in my loan unless I sell the land. Says it's for the town's good, but it's for him and Eleanor." Clara's fist clenched. "He's bullying us because we won't bend." Samuel nodded, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "You see it clearer than most, Clara. But I won't let him win. This land's all I have left of Mary, of what we built." His voice cracked, and Clara felt a pull to comfort him, but fear held her back. What if they lost everything? The storm broke as they returned to the cabin, rain lashing the windows like a warning. Lydia arrived, soaked but urgent, her words tumbling out. "Amos is holding a town meeting tonight, Clara. He's saying you're a troublemaker, stirring Samuel against the town's interests. Eleanor's backing him, claiming you're after his land." Clara's heart sank, but anger flared brighter. "I'm done letting them twist my story," she said, her voice steel. Samuel stepped closer, his presence solid. "We'll face them together," he said, and the warmth in his tone sparked something fierce in her. At the town hall, rain drummed the roof as Clara and Samuel stood before a packed room. Amos held court, his voice smooth, as he painted Clara as an outsider, a threat to Willow Creek's prosperity. Eleanor stood beside him, her beauty a weapon, her smile venomous. "Miss Everett has no roots here," Amos declared. "She's using Samuel for her own gain." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her voice clear. "I came to Willow Creek for a promise," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "Not for land or wealth, but for a chance to belong. I've worked your fields, fought your fires, rebuilt your schoolhouse. If that's not roots, what is?" Her words hung in the air, and Tom the farmer stood. "She's done more for us than Amos ever has," he said, his voice gruff. Lydia nodded, and others joined in their voices, a chorus of support. Amos's face reddened, but Eleanor's laugh cut through the noise. "You're a dreamer, Clara. Samuel will see through you." Clara turned to Samuel, her breath catching. He took her hand, his grip firm, and faced the crowd. "Clara's the truest person I know," he said, his voice steady. "I choose her." The room fell silent, and Clara's heart soared even as thunder roared outside. Had they turned the tide, or had they only deepened Amos's wrath? The rain had softened to a gentle patter, draping Willow Creek in a silvery mist as Clara stood on the porch of Samuel's cabin, her heart still racing from the town hall's charged air. The scent of wet earth and pine filled her lungs, grounding her as she replayed Samuel's words, "I choose her." They had walked back through the storm hand in hand, the townsfolk's cheers echoing behind them. Tom, Lydia, and others had stood with them, their voices drowning out Amos's bluster. But Clara knew the fight wasn't over. Amos's pride and Eleanor's ambition wouldn't fade quietly. Yet for the first time, she felt not just hope, but certainty. She belonged here, and maybe, just maybe, she belonged with Samuel. Inside, the fire crackled, casting a warm glow across the cabin's simple walls. Samuel set a kettle on his movements steady, but his eyes searching hers. "You were fearless tonight, Clara," he said, his voice low like the rumble of the river after rain. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." Her cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." The air between them hummed heavy with unspoken truce. Before she could lose her nerve, Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "Samuel, I came here for a promise, but I stayed for you. Not your land, not your name, you." Her voice trembled raw with the weight of her past rejections, but she pressed on. "I love you." The words hung fragile like the mist outside, and for a moment she feared they'd shatter. But Samuel's face softened, his gray eyes bright with something deeper than words. He cupped her face, his touch gentle but sure. "Clara, I've loved you since the day you walked up my path unafraid and unbroken. I want a life with you if you'll have me." Their kiss was soft at first, then fierce, a promise sealed in the warmth of the firelight. The world outside faded, the whispers, the threats, the doubts, leaving only the truth of their shared strength. But the moment was broken by a sharp knock. Lydia stood at the door, her face grim. "Amos is leaving town," she said. "He tried to rally the bank against Samuel, but the townsfolk refused to back him. Eleanor's gone too, headed east, they say." Clara's breath caught relief, mingling with disbelief. Their fight had changed Willow Creek, not just for them, but for everyone. Weeks later, Clara and Samuel stood before the rebuilt schoolhouse, its fresh paint gleaming under a crisp autumn sun. The town gathered not just to celebrate the building, but to witness their wedding. Clara wore a simple dress adorned with wildflowers Lydia had woven into her hair, and Samuel's smile was brighter than the golden leaves. As they vowed to love and honor each other, Clara felt the weight of her journey lift. Every rejection, every doubt had led her here, to a man who saw her, a community that embraced her. Their legacy grew beyond their vows. Clara and Samuel opened the schoolhouse to all, teaching children and adults alike, fostering a town that valued heart over wealth. As the sun set, painting the hills in hues of amber and rose, Clara knew she'd found more than love. She'd found a home, a purpose, a life built on resilience and truth. If you love this story of resilience and love, overcoming prejudice, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel now to explore more.